Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by author Leopoldo Gout to talk about his latest novel, Piñata. So thank you so much for coming and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm so excited to be here. Um, I love podcasts and I love your program, so I'm excited that you chose us.
I mean, of course. And for our listeners who are not aware, can you tell us a little bit about your novel, Piñata?
Well, Piñata started a long time ago. It was a honest exploration of like a lot of feelings that I had during the last unnameable presidency, which I don't want to name the unnameable, and at the same time I was, exploring the my culture. My background is Mexico City, but my father grew up in Chiapas, and one of his relatives was Zapotec, indigenous, and in Mexico, when you grow up in the middle class, they try to hide it sometimes. Your it's a They have a very strange relationship with the indigenous culture, which is changing, and I couldn't be more excited and thrilled when I saw a direct relative with a Zapotec lineage. And my first novel, Ghost Radio, um, had elements of that, and it was also a horror book. And it's very funny that we're talking now so many years later because uh, we hired a young workless actor um, to to perform on my the voice of my first book, Ghost Radio, and it turned out that that actor is Pedro Pascal. So a lot of people are discovering my book again, my first novel again, thanks to him. So I love it because it's kind of giving it birth. But I mentioned Ghost Radio because it was the origins in a way of Piñata. Like I started on what I call a rabbit hole of of research. A lot of the art that I do in both in novels and in documentary work that I do in movies and in contemporary art have are all they all spring from the same rabbit holes. It's really weird. Like people think I do a lot of different things, but I really not. I have the same kind of methods when I work on different mediums. And in the case of Piñata, I started. I was in the middle of the wormhole years ago, and I discovered this horrific image about that where a bunch of priests, Catholic priests, subjugating Aztec children. And back in the day, what I discovered was that they used piñatas to fill them with food, and they would grab terrified, starving children and force them to hit the piñata. Now, it's so weirdly specific and it's so terrifying visual that it has to be true because it's almost like it's too weird and too specific to be fiction. And I really love to go into history and really actually look at the drawings of the people that lived there. And it really, I felt that it was one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. And it was at the, so I put it in a drawer, and it percolated for a few years. And then when I finished my last book, Monarca, which is kind of the opposite of Piñata, that was about my daughter, kind of passage between a young woman to a teenager in an illustrated book, as I said, called Monarca. And I kind of like, when I was it was my COVID book, and I was very immersed in that observations of my amazing daughter Inez, how she her mind was exploding with rage at the last presidency. So she kind of connected me to this female rage that I'm super um, passionate about it, a little bit because I was raised in a tiny apartment with lots of books with a very feminist, larger than life mom who we never had a lot of money, but we had a lot of culture. And I grew up meeting writers and artists that went to Mexico, and like Luis Buñuel, a filmmaker, and his family, and the the Carlos Monsiváis, a great intellectual, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. There was a lot of incredible people in Mexico City that you would bump into that kind of changed the world as far as I saw it, and visual artists as well. So we all grew up with that kind of like you know layers of culture, and my mom was an activist, and she had that rage that my daughter is manifested years later. My mom passed away, but she really passed the torch of that passion to my daughter. So I just kind of connected those two worlds of the rage on the one side of that horrific image. I'm really big in one image can really trigger an entire novel, a movie, a series of paintings, a series of books, and whatnot. And in this case, it was that super scary image of just imagine the fear, because they would use the piñatas by painting the gods of the indigenous people of Mexico, and they were trying to indoctrinate the children by many methods. And there was a kind of like very violent way where they were pulling down the pyramids and building churches on top of those pyramids, and using the same stones of the pyramids for the church. And even if you any church that is 500 years old or more in Mexico is probably made by the stones of a pyramid in the location of a pyramid. So it was kind of a that kind of rage that I felt that was horrific, and it was a collective trauma. And I felt, I know that Octavio Paz and other writers have dealt with it in a kind of more intellectual way, but as a fan of the genre of horror, I wanted to explore it and dive into it, and it was very, it was an amazing kind of cathartic process to write the novel.
Wow. Well, something I did want to ask, and something you had mentioned, was how indigenous culture and history is taught in Mexico. And you said growing up in Mexico City, it wasn't there, but you did mention that that's getting better.
I think it's a struggle. I mean, there were always that kind of like double life that they would like talk about the Aztecs, and we would do our research papers on the different cultures. But it was very editorialized and very weird, and they. I do think that I grew up with a very open-minded mother. So I'll give you an example. She would support lots of different groups and people, and did a lot of activism in support of people, and she had a lot of friends who were indigenous, and a group of women who used to come to visit us once a year, and they would bring these masks. And I love the power that the price of the masks were totally different than what we have experienced in our own culture. So their mask was priced in the level of dancing. So if a mask was very danced, it would be more expensive, even if the mask was smaller than another much bigger, more colorful, more intense labor mask that you would presume that's the expensive one. But their system of values was super different. So the priciest masks were the ones that they danced a lot, and they would say, well, this was really danced for days, so it has to be more expensive. So that really blew my mind when I was a kid, like just seeing the magic that they had. And I was lucky that we had friends who were archaeologists and contemporary archaeologists or artists that very intimately explored the art of many different civilizations and cultures that grew in Mexico. And I was very lucky to go deep into that for years. But in general, there's a lot of stories. I mean, I think that this definitely has been a theme in my recent work. I have a TV show that's coming out on Netflix called American Jesus, based on a graphic novel from Mark Miller. And I did literally, my brother and I created the show, and we literally pulled in some of these ideas into the writing of the show, and the and we were lucky enough that we met incredible indigenous population near where we were shooting, and they were very curious of our work, so we integrated their culture into our with their permission. We worked with them, and two of them became major actors in our show, and they speak their language in our shows. It's really cool because it came very organic, and they were really fantastic in the it wasn't like forced presence. Their characters really moved the story forward, and it was a really great collaboration. So in Mexico, yes, it's been getting a little bit better, but I think that we have ways to go on the service of remembering the the cultures that kind of got squashed by the first conquest, and then the second conquest, in my opinion, is kind of the influence of American and European culture that kind of dominates the theaters and the radio and the music. So there's like a double or triple colonization, and this time around it's more cultural. And I left my country, so I'm not saying that I'm perfect at all or anything, but I am. I still have family there. I go a lot, and we shot this show there, so I have lots of roots there still. Um, but yeah, that's been a process that I hope that keeps getting on fire. And by the way, my first movie that we ever made, uh, you know, in 2011 was the lead character we cast on it. Tenoch Huerta, who was Namor in the Black Panther. And he mentions us because he said before the my brother and I hired him on Days of Grace, our first movie. Like he always thought that he would always play the bad guy in all the movies, and we we worked with him as a lead, and we met him doing a short film, and he was such an extraordinary actor that we really fought to before anyone had given him the leading role. And now he's one of the greatest Mexican actors, and he won the Mexican Academy with our film, and from there he's been, we've been lucky to work with him on a few projects.
Wow, I did not know that. I mean, as someone who works in so many different artistic mediums, how does that translate to writing a novel?
Well, I think that first of all, I'm dyslexic, so my process is very tortured. It's easier for me to paint than to write. Um, thank God for my publishers and my editors and all the people that take care of me, because otherwise it would be a disaster. But my imagination is where I land, and my curiosity, and I feel like, as I said, I don't see the difference of my process when I'm making a visual art form on a painting or sculpture. I worked with memory, and I worked through layers of information and ideas that float in the ether, and I capture them, and I smell them, and I grind them into layers of ideas on the surface, or on a specific structure, or on a sculpture, whatever I'm doing. And um, and it's the same that I do with writing. My process is very similar. I start with some obsession with an image, with a character, with something very specific and very intimate, and from there I go, oh, this is exciting. And in the case of Piñata, I imagine a scene that was the first thing I wrote. Is I imagine these kids getting dragged 500 years ago and forced to to kick the piñata, and until the receptacle broke, and then they would jump to eat the food. And kind of like, it reminded me that Catholicism practices cannibalism every day in their mass. I mean, they eat the flesh and the blood of Christ. It is weird because, like, they came to Mexico, and they claim that the Aztecs were doing human sacrifice, and I don't see the big difference between, like, those civilizations. I mean, I know there's a difference, but it's the murder that that the church had done for centuries and on the name of God and on one gods, and they replaced that bloody god with their older bloody god. So I to me was a continuation of a curiosity of that craziness and that madness, and that was like the spark. Like all of my projects get, at some point, from nothingness I get this spark, and then it can change and can end up in a musical or whatnot. I'm very free about the form. Like I've had projects that start with a drawing and end up in a book, like in the case of Monarca, or some projects start with an image that I see in a research and it end up in a book, like in Piñata's case. And in movies, the same. It's all like a layered process where I use everything that I can, and I'm like a voracious consumer of information, or art and ideas and books of other people and stories, and I'm just endlessly curious. And I hope that it's reflected into the Piñata books, and I hope that people that read it can smell my energy a little bit, because we have a short window in this world for our existence. So I have a hope that I can inject some energy into that moment. And I take the time that people give you as an author, as an artist, very seriously.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, the prologue to Piñata in itself is extremely harrowing.
Yeah,
I mean, it is quite the way to open up a story.
it's crazy because a lot of people have been criticizing the book, saying like, why didn't you do the whole book like that? But because the book happens in modern time and the prologue is like 500 years ago. But I feel like I was not ready to do that book, only to do it 500 years ago, because I don't know, I don't think that it's my book to write yet. Maybe it is, but I feel I would like an indigenous writer to do a horror book. I would love to. I know I have some indigenous blood, but I didn't grow up as an indigenous person. I didn't grow up with their culture, so I would be fascinating to have like a Yaqui or a Purepetua, which are the Michoacan, like your mom. The Purepetuas are the Michoacan, one of the many tribes down there in central Mexico, and so it would be amazing to empower and help a younger generation of indigenous people to express themselves with the tools and the mediums that we had. So hopefully this helps on that process.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about it being written in the modern day and that we're following a Mexican American woman who is going back to Mexico. You know, she's bringing her daughters. She wants to share her culture with them. And maybe she feels a little bit of guilt about what that looks like. And in that journey, we get this story of history that was taken.
It's funny because that is a very complicated part of the book for me, because I married the love of my life, which we've been married for 20 years, my wife, and they and I have two American kids, and she's American. I mean, she looks more like Italian or something, but her mom was her family was all the way to the Mayflower. They're really Americans. Which, if you would have asked any one of my friends in Mexico that I would end up marrying an American woman, they would have like laughed you out of the boat, because I was so crazy and passionate about you know diverse cultures and stuff. But you can't predict love, and and it just happened. So my conf- my com- com- complication is that I have American kids, no matter what, how I spin it, even though they have Mexican papers as well. They grew like we're an intense family, but I have, because I do so many things, most of the time I'm away, and she, as a mother, she decided to take less jobs outside of the family and spend more time with our kids, which I liked. It's her choice, her life, and she wanted to be a mother, and that's fantastic for us, and it's great for our kids. But that means that they grew up with in an American household, and my wife as an American, it's English is by far their first language, so it's sometimes, I get sad about that, because I think I could have been a lot more proactive. So I exorcised a little bit of those feelings in the book. They're very personal, and I but at the same time, it's an entertaining novel. I didn't want to be heavy-handed with it. I just wanted to express in the tropes of the genre of horror. I think that you can get away with doing a lot of stuff, which to me is fantastic. So it's very personal in some ways, even though it's a exciting, supernatural thriller. But I still managed to inject a lot of my personal traumas and frustrations with myself, and as a expat, as a Mexican living in New York all these years, as an artist, you kind of are transplanted, and there's a lot of things that you win and you earn and you make, and there's a lot of things that you lose, and it's when you're in the middle of that, it's it's fascinating and kind of crazy to dive into those emotions.
Yeah, well, speaking of the horror genre, what's your history with it? Did you grow up being, a kid who liked horror?
No, not really. I grew up. I did love. Big influence to me was Night of the Living Dead because I saw it when I
Hmm.
was probably 13 in a Cineteca in Mexico City, and it was projected in film. And I was very moved by the idea that you could deal with racism through a zombie movie. To me, it was like like an
Yeah.
explosion in my head. And then, like, obviously, some of the Aztec paintings and art in the manuscripts are terrifying, and some of the monsters that you do. And when you grow up in Mexico, it's like you see everybody has a ghost story. I have personal stories that happen, weird shit, and it's not like if as if I'm a total believer, but with the grain of skepticism. Very
Hmm.
strange phenomena has happened to me, and I could talk hours on this. And the reality of our world is that we are constantly reminded of that in Mexico. And for example, I love how some of my aunts, when they, a specific one aunt, what she read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and she was talking like, I don't understand why they call it magical realism. Where's the magic? Like for her, all of the spirits and things that that book evokes, it's like normal. It's like everyday life. So she's like, where's the magic? I don't get it. So and then one time I was in a vacation in some beach in Mexico, and I was probably also 13, 14, and some American left their copy of Pet Cemetery, and it blew my mind. That book, like King Stephen King did a, it's a magnificent book on, like, it really blew my mind of the creepiness of the, kind of how he also used indigenous ideas into his world, and rage and indigenous strangeness, and the Frankenstein. He kind of put Frankenstein upside down in a way, and then years later, I read another book that really influenced me was Let the Right One In by,
Hmm.
like, I can't pronounce his last name either, but um, that book blew my mind of how somebody can grab the idea of a of a vampire story and refresh it and make it real, but still talk about bullying and a lot of things that happened. I was bullied when I was in school. I still have nightmares about it. So that book really touched my heart. And then, my first novel started with, I remember looking at the last image of The Shining, of the movie, not the book, the movie where the Kubrick pans into dollies into a photograph of the hotel in the 20s, and Jack Nicholson is there. And I really realized that little dolly in transformed you, because it changed the whole movie. Your whole movie, suddenly you were, oh my god, the whole movie maybe was the dream of the hotel. And that's kind of like part of my art. Like I'm doing a painting right now of a dog sinking on sand like Goya's uh, art, which is very nightmarish. And since I'm a kid, I'm fascinated by the monsters of the artist Goya, the Spanish artist from the 1700s. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. But I'm doing the dream of that dog. So I always had my work has always been like some of my visual work always is like those few moments where the you wake up from a vivid dream and it's vanishing, but you still know that you saw something very vivid in your dream. And I'm always fascinated how I can capture that visually in some of my art. And obviously that spills into my books. But at the beginning of I've been painting and making stories since I'm 4 years old. So it's like since I was a kid, I was always drawing like skulls and monsters and the fighting of the
Mm-hmm.
two different powerful monsters. And I got into trouble in school because I couldn't really. I was very dyslexic, but I was always writing my stories and doodling. And when my mom passed away, she left me a stack of my grades. And back then, they would write them by hand, your grades. And all my teachers would write, Leopoldo is kind of a bright kid, but unfortunately, he'll never make it because he only cares about his doodles and his little stories. And when I received the packet, I was reading it. My mom passed away, and I was kind of emotional and crying and thinking of my mom. She left us all these weird little gifts that she hid for us to find them when she was gone. And there was all stacks with a bow and said for Polo. That's how she used to call me. And I was reading the teacher's opinion. I mean, it was amazing because all of them were very like I was opening them in my studio, and I was looking around, and I still doing the same thing. I'm doing my doodles and I'm writing my little stories, and that never changed.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, the teachers thought that that would make me into a failure. And what's funny about it is that then I looked at the my mom's signature, and it was so bold and confident and kind of, I don't give a fuck. This is my son. Oops, sorry for my French, but I hope that you can slip in one bad word. But the signature of my mom was so bold and so kind of like, well, that's who he is,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing of signing, but saying like, I don't care, because it was big and she put her name all over it. So it was really cool to have that little message from my mom of saying, yeah,
Yeah, and then she
I,
kept that for you.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so the horror started there. And then I think I was fascinated by the art in the like Goya, which dealt with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of monsters and stuff. And I was very fascinated. Then there's a female poet from the 17th century called Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who also influenced me a lot. And one of her big poems, she was a nun, and she was beautiful, and she was an extraordinary lady, and had to fight the Catholic Church to let her do her research and her work. And her most famous song is poem is Primero Sueño, and it's really dark and mysterious. It's a gorgeous poem of shadows and monsters, and like a Francis Bacon type of poem. And she, imagine, she's one of the first feminists in Latin America. You should definitely, it's a great memoir, no memoir, but a biography of her by Octavio Paz called the the trips or the trips of faith, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
it's extraordinary book if you're into that kind of thing. And then, so it was always there in terms of art and ideas. But then when I read uh, Pet Cemetery, when I saw the Romero's movie of the Night of the Living Dead, those things really, and then The Shining, the ending of The Shining, and I was really young when I saw it, but that scene really, you know, hooked me because it was so gorgeously, you know, on the one hand is a family that's falling apart. On the other hand is a metaphysical, crazy
Yeah.
spiritual movie where the hotel maybe had everything you saw. Maybe it's a nightmare that the hotel is having, or a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things really wanted me to play in this genre. And I love it. And the more I love the movies that people do these days, like Jordan Peele all of the, the guy who did The Witch. It's
Hmm.
extraordinary. So, like I'm very, I just find the genre extraordinary.
Are you looking to adapt Piñata for film or television?
Yeah, I think it's a film, and I'm working with with some financiers in a studio that I don't know if I'm allowed to say who it is yet,
Yeah.
but they're fantastic, and they want to finance it. And I have a vision for it, but I'm in discussion with a few directors because I'm I do a lot of movies myself, and it's all about finding the perfect director,
Hmm.
that really falls in love. And I really would love to work with a woman, just because it's a very feminine story, and I love the ideas that come from that feminine power. So for the specific nature of what piñata is, I would love to be able to find like a
Hmm.
powerful Mexican or Latin American, or somebody that understands Mexico, and that she has sisters. The book has a lot to do with being sisters and daughters,
Hmm.
and I'm fascinated by that energy. So I would love somebody with that has
Yeah.
that kind of power.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I know you mentioned earlier about the Ghost Radio audiobook, but I had bought it years ago. And when we were setting up this interview, I was like, that name, like his name seems familiar. And I went through my Audible library and then I saw the
Oh,
audiobook that I had bought several years ago. And I said, it's narrated by Pedro Pascal.
yeah, I know, it's amazing. It's
So,
getting a whole new life. The book, I'm so happy with it because I love the book, and it got great reviews. But it's one of those projects that I felt that it didn't have enough exposure. Like being a
mhm,
Latin American writer, it's hard. Like if you're the celebrity sister or whoever, they give you the View, they give you this, they give you all these platforms, and I think that when you're Latino, you have to like work 50 times harder to get even near, unless you're a superstar like Salma Hayek. Then it's obviously they want you, but I think we struggle a lot in getting the right exposure, and
mhm.
I believe me, I tried very hard to push to talk out the book, and it got incredible reviews, and now I'm so excited because people are discovering, thanks to Pedro, who's now a huge star.
Mhm.
So it's giving it a second round of life, so I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. I'm glad you're able to take advantage of the Pedro Pascal fever.
Well, I mean, the book mostly is the book.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll reflect. I don't care if it reflects on, money or not. It's more about, like, I want the story to be told multiple times. I love that story, and it's almost like a prequel to Piñata. So
Yes, they do have similar themes, and I definitely see the inspiration with the final shot of The Shining as well.
fantastic! Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy you do, because it's one of my most proud ideas inside of Ghost Radio. And in Piñata, I wanted a different book. I really wanted something a little less, because Ghost Radio was very esoteric and it's weird, and it's amorphous. And with Piñata, I wanted a little more of a, like more of a propelling story that happens to, like a possession story that happens to a family. I wanted it to be much more, you know, uh, kinetic in a way, you know. So that's how the book um, kind of manifested in the storyline of Piñata.
Yeah. I do like that. So I definitely have to check out Monarca
Oh yeah, I love
to
that.
complete it.
Monarca is fun. But it's the opposite, because Monarca it's very young. It's for all family. It's very, sweet. It's a book
Hmm.
that I wrote pure light, and I wrote and painted it. There's over 200 images that I painted myself, and I co-wrote it with its wonderful filmmaker Eva Arigis, whose family is very big in Michoacan. His father gave the sanctuary of the Monarca, uh, the convinced UNESCO to declare it a World Heritage space, and now the avocado cartels are trying to cut those beautiful trees where all the monarchas go, and make avocado farms. So you can't write this up. It's crazy,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful poetic uh, fable that was about my, really just about my daughter. So it's almost like the exact opposite of Piñata. Piñata is the monsters and the beautiful horror, as I call it, which is a very Guillermo del Toro kind of coined uh,
Mhm.
phrase.
Yeah.
And Monarca is the opposite. It's like a little fable.
See that? It's also like dark butterflies and light butterflies.
Exactly, exactly. And they actually appear. So it's very weird because I was working on the books kind of almost at the not at the same time but in the same kind of period of my life. And it's just that Monarca was supposed to be much earlier, but it took me for I didn't calculate all the painting I had to do, so it took me a much longer. So they kind of ended up like being flowing from very close together, which is you know not ideal, um, but it's something that I'm super proud of that they came out. And again, like, I think what I love about you know my piñata, when is that there's a I needed that catharsis. I needed
Hmm.
that kind of take the demons out of the for a walk kind of
Yeah.
feeling. And there's a great painting by Gainsborough that I used to see. I was lucky to have a scholarship to do art in London for many years,
Hmm.
and I used to go to the British Museum, and they have this beautiful like, painting by Gainsborough with his daughters trying to grab a butterfly, and that's also a big inspiration for Piñata because that painting is it's a weird composition. The butterfly is literally at the left edge of the painting, and you feel that if the daughters are just at that moment when they're turning from girls to women, and you feel if they grab that butterfly, the whole world will go poof into darkness. And it's a very personal painting that he did for himself, for his family, and I kind of like really like I've been seeing that painting for years and years and years, and it never bores me. It never. It always tells me story. This, and I started watching that painting way before I had a daughter, but it was something that moved me. And now that I have a daughter and a son, like the painting kind of became more powerful. And that moment, I feel it also creeped into Piñata in a way.
I love that. Also, how did you get into sculpting? Was that I know you studied that in college, right?
Yeah, no. When I was a kid, I used to do art everywhere in the walls, in the street, you know, everywhere. Like I was on content, and I didn't want to. I wanted to get out of Mexico. I grew up there, so I wanted to explore the world. And I love the idea of Europe because I didn't want to go to America, and I felt that in Europe. I'm very passionate about old world cultures, and I was England was a place that a lot of it's a small country, but they have David Bowie and they have Francis Bacon and so many of my William Blake, so many of my favorite artists, Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush. So many of my favorite artists have come from England for whatever reason, and I wanted to explore that and see it and learn from there and draw a little bit of that power and it was the greatest thing. And in college, I went in England. You go to something that's called a foundation, which is a little bit like a mishmash of everything because you're a kid. You just were in high school and you don't
Yeah.
know where you're going. So it gives you a year of kind of you know what do you want to focus on. And then once I was there, like sculpture was so essentially uh, kind of I was connected to it in a way. Like I could do all sorts
Hmm.
of things in space and gravity and volume, and they were real things.
Hmm.
Uh, objects that I was creating, and very naturally I ended up doing the whole college in like 4 years, the foundation year, and then another 4 years on sculpture.
Oh, wow.
And then, but obviously, I painted and I drew and I took all sorts
Hmm.
of different classes. And I was very the oddball. Like everybody was very focused on conceptual art, and I love conceptual art. But I've never had the. I love to make things. I love the beauty of the things that I create. So I was more into my own process of trial and error of the materials that I like, and my influences are like from cave painters to Stanley Kubrick to Stephen King in my painting.
Yeah.
So it's I think that all of the things that I do are a big soup, and I love the freedom that it gives me, that I don't have to be, like I would like to have my office said unestablished. Like I don't want to be established, and that causes problems and confusion sometimes in Hollywood. Like some people don't understand who I
Hmm.
am, or if I'm doing this or if I'm doing that, and I'm unashamed about it. I love my process. I love to create. I loved every second of making Piñata, and like if we make a movie, it'll be so lucky to expand the universe into that world.
Yeah.
um, I believe in it a lot, and I want to play with it, um, as far as I can. I mean, and I with the beautiful people of Tor, my publishers, Night Nightfire, I love them because when we when we set up Piñata with them, it was a 2 book deal. So I'm already in the middle of the second one. So it's kind of like a really exciting place for me to work, and I just love I'm very lucky that I'm there, because I really believe that they are doing some of the most interesting, exciting genre works out there, and I love their taste. I love that they're big supporters of horror and the LGBTQ community, diversity, all sorts of things. So I couldn't be more happy for that, you know, for the publisher and who they are and what they've accomplished as a kind of a house of scribblers in a very particular way. And it's been a joy to work with them. So I hope that it succeeds, because it will let me work more times with them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as someone who reads a lot of horror, I was very happy to hear about the new Nightfire imprint, and I've really
Yeah,
loved the stuff that they've put out.
yeah, yeah. It's fantastic, and it's so oddly focused, but also very free. So it's
Hmm.
almost like a vibe, like a I it, they make me feel I'm with Geffen Records when he started, and he had like James Taylor and and Johnny Mitchell and that kind of people. Like I just feel like I'm in a rock and roll community. I love their books. I'm buying their books as well.
Yeah.
I always support other writers, so I buy a lot of books. And when I meet a writer, even if I meet them in a coffee shop next to me by coincidence, I buy their books. I try to be very supportive of other scribblers. You
Mhm.
know.
So, one tradition we have on this show is to ask people what they've been enjoying in horror lately, or a chilling obsession. So, is there anything you've been enjoying lately?
Yes, well, but they beat me out of the punch, because I've been for years. I'm a huge encyclopedic YouTube researcher, so I was on the trail of the mushrooms that make ants zombies.
Mm.
So I actually had done a lot of research on that. So when the TV show Pedro Pascal came out, I was so I was happy, but at the same time, I was like shit. Like, and I know it's a big video game, and they've been using this for years, but I didn't. I don't play those video games. I'm scared of the time I could. Like, I love those kind of things. I could like end up wasting a month of my life just playing those things. So I don't have any video games in my house, because it's a wormhole that you can't get me out of it.
Hmm.
So I my but I still look. There's so many amazing little weird documentaries that I to me they're like horror. Like for example, some of them are on YouTube, but some of them are big, like big documentaries, like Three Perfect Strangers. I don't know if Three Identical Strangers. I don't know if you saw it. It's a documentary about three twins that they don't know they're twins and they randomly meet because they live in the same area and people keep s- like confusing them, and one of them not, and he travels by coincidence to the state where the other two. So they basically find each other. There's three identical twins, and it's very macabre how they were created. And then it's a great documentary. And if you see that documentary with the perspective of a horror idea, I love that. I
Yeah.
love the to watch some things for my own research, and I think that I'm really in the trail of that, of like finding strange things in the real world that could potentially become my next book or my next idea or my next influence of
Hmm.
ideas. So to me that is really fun for me to obsess on. So I'm looking always for, strange creatures or strange places in the planet
Yeah.
Earth or unexplained phenomena or, that really weird recording of a radio station in Russia that nobody knows where it is and they've been trying to find it for years, and it comes and goes, and it's like obviously very connected to Ghost Radio, but it's to me there's so many really creepy, fascinating stories out there in the real world, and I'm constantly, that's my obsession. I want to find the next thing always, like the when I found that mushroom that made animals into zombies, I was so taken, I was so fascinating. So I it took me into a huge mushroom journey, and I've been exploring microdosing, and I've been exploring the power of mushrooms, and I that is like I've read a bunch of books. That's a really big rabbit hole that I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. I think there's been a bit of mushroom horror lately. I mean, there's just so many ways that that can go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not doing a mushroom horror
Yeah.
book because I feel it's super well said in The Last of Us, but I'm but it took me into the power of plants, and I am
Hmm.
exploring that, and I have no idea where it will take me, or if it'll appear in a book or in a painting or just me having to microdose or in all sorts of other manifestations of my art.
Hmm.
But I'm fascinated by it, and I don't know. I love this is exactly what happens with my paintings and my books. Is sometimes I'm working on the layers and of the ideas. I don't know how it's going to get there, but I'll know when I'm there. So I
Yeah.
don't plan that. Oh, I'm going to do a book about that. Very rarely. In the case
Hmm.
of Piñata, this book definitely started with that image that I saw of children being, forced to break the piñatas, and the piñatas being painted with the symbols of their gods, and then
Hmm.
forced to eat the food on the floor. That to me was horrific. That really was a spark. And also, if you analyze the song, another thing about piñata, which is cool, as I've been releasing songs that are based on the famous song. I don't know if you've been to a piñata party, but in any Mexican, when you're hitting the piñata, they blindfold you,
Yeah.
and then there's a song that is dale, 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 no pierdas el tiempo. I'm not going to sing because I have terrible voice, but you can look for the song, and when and the words of that song are terrifying because it's dale, 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 it's hit it, hit it. No pierdas el tino, don't miss out, don't lose the aim, porque si lo pierdes, because if you lose your aim, pierdes el camino, you get lost. And it's camino, and then there's destino. So there's an evocation of like your spirit will get lost if you don't hit this piñata.
Yeah.
Your true north, like the Catholics like to say,
Yeah.
will get lost. And
Like your
that's
path.
a
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a big part of the book. And so I thought, holy macaroni. So all the great horror films of the 80s, like Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger, they had this children music slowed down at the
Yeah.
beginning of the movies that were very, very eerie. And I'm doing that with the Piñata song. And I researched, and it's a free song, so anybody can use the lyrics.
Ooh.
There's
Yeah.
no one. It's public domain. So I'm doing with this great musician, and I'll send you copies of it.
Yeah.
Oriana, um, um, she is a, I'm exploring with a few musicians, but the first one that finished the one of the songs is Oriana Giri, and she's a great young Mexican musician. She's studying in Europe, and she made me a few of the songs. So make sure we're connected in email. So I send for your playlist because these are full
Yeah.
songs that are using the piñata song, but with a connected to horror. And I also have a bunch of Ghost Radio songs in SoundCloud. So I'll send you.
Oh
I
yeah.
always work with musicians when I'm writing, but in the case of piñata, it's very connected to this question of your obsession. So because sound, the whole thing of piñata, one of the big premises is like the sound of the Nahuatl people, and if you the memory for it, if we forget it, what will happen if we forget
Yeah.
how the language sound? And that's kind of the engine of the part of the engine of the horror story. So sound will be very important in the if we adapt it to movie, but also in the book. I'll for
Yeah.
the next year I'll release beautiful or weird or strange songs and
Hmm.
sounds around the book as companions to the book.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm very excited to hear
Yeah,
that. But speaking of songs, the other tradition that we have on this podcast is to ask our guests for a final girl song. So I know people interpret this a lot of different ways, but yeah, like the final girl standing at the end of the movie covered in blood. What's your
yeah.
song?
Well, apart from Dale Dale Dale, my version of it, because that's going to be fun. I love Voodoo Suites by Perez Prado. It's a song that I want to use in a horror movie one day. It's a beautiful, strange. It's almost like you feel that you're in a weird kind of a ritual when you hear it, and it's so it still stands with the times of with the with the oceans of time. It
Hmm.
still stands fresh and weird and cool, and it is an extraordinary song, and it has a long overture with drums, and you feel like you're. I wish I was literally tripping with peyote when you hear it, and it can get you there in a space. But I feel like in the context of the end of a movie, of a girl at the end of the, if
Hmm.
Piñata was a movie, I love the transition into that song because it definitely it's written with that fire. That song was written in fire of
Hmm.
the gods. I can feel it. You can feel it. So I recommend people to play it really loud and just let
Okay.
the sounds go, and have a bottle of wine or tequila on the sun, or mezcal on a sunset, and just play it really loud, or on a moon, like under a big moon, and just hear that song. It's fantastic.
What was it called again?
It's the um, it's called the Voodoo Suite
Ooh, okay.
by Perez Prado. Voodoo, like Voodoo Suite, Suite, Voodoo Suite by Perez Prado,
Ooh.
who's
I
the
will
the
be
Mambo King.
awesome. Yeah, I will be adding that to the playlist so people can check that out, and I will see if I can find a version on Instagram to post on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds really good, so I'm going to have to get myself ready and set the scene before I listen to it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Please don't jump on it. And I'll send you some of my songs of
Okay.
the like the both of Piñata and of Ghost Radio, just so that you can explore it.
Yeah. But this was very lovely. Yeah, I had a great time. It's been very fun. I've enjoyed this. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on here and talk to me.
It's
Uh,
fantastic. I'm so happy that you invited me. Thank you so much. And I'm always available for good podcasts.
Oh, awesome to hear. Well, thank you. Everyone can go check out. When does your book come out? It'll probably be out by the.
Yeah, it's out now.
Okay.
You guys can go. Please buy it. It's Piñata by Leopoldo Gout. and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed creating it. And it's easy to find me online, and my Instagram is Leopoldo, just my name. So it's very easy to DM me. I'm a very open source person.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Un abrazo.
Un abrazo. Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at BooksFreezerPod, on Instagram and TikTok at BooksInTheFreezer, or you can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes will be at booksinthefreezer.com. If you would like to support the podcast, there are a few ways to do that. One of them is to leave a review on a site like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast that allows you to leave a rating. A recent 5-star review on Apple Podcast is from Tanya Estes that says, "An absolute delight. This is the first horror podcast I found and remains a favorite. I love that we get a woman's insight into horror, but I also love how mellow Stephanie is while remaining entertaining." Thank you. This allows the guests to be centered. Too often, hosts of podcasts center themselves, and Stephanie does a good job of keeping the show moving while making the guest feel like the star. Very well done. I also love that she asks thoughtful questions and has many great themes. Very entertaining show. Well, thank you so much for leaving those kind words. And as I mentioned before, you can leave a 5-star review. Or whatever star you want to review. It's your life. Obviously, you get to share whatever your opinion is on the show. What would I prefer personally? 5-star, obviously. But you could do that at Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Another way to support the show is just to tell a friend about it. Spread the word. Post about it on wherever you are in the interwebs, Instagram stories, Twitter, just talking about it, word of mouth, in real life recommendations. They're huge for kind of small one-person indie podcasts like this. Another way to support the show is to become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. There's a $1, $3, and a $5 level of support. There's like pay once annual options where I think you get some kind of a discount if you choose to do that. But there's all kinds of different perks at each level. I think the lowest level you get early episode releases, but at the other ones you do get Voxer group chats, bonus episodes, knowing what theme episodes are coming up, as well as guests when I have authors on, and having the ability to ask questions and have your questions be included in episodes where I talk to people. So check that out if that sounds interesting to you. That is at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. And I think the last way I usually mention on here is just using affiliate links. So yeah, if you go to the show notes, there's affiliate links for all kinds of different things. Libro FM, Fangoria, there's an Amazon link. So just doing normal shopping that you would normally do, just clicking that link helps out the podcast a little bit. So thank you to all of you who have taken the time to do that. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Instagram at That's What She Read. That is That's with 2 A's, or on Twitter at Lady_Gagnon. That's LADY_GAGNON. So thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.